Nobody believed me when I told them my boss was stealing $2.5 million from our clients. By the end of this story, he'd be begging me to keep quiet, but it was already too late. Like most of us, I thought hard work and loyalty would eventually pay off. I'd been at Morrison Financial Consulting for 8 years, starting as a junior analyst and working my way up to senior project manager. I genuinely loved what I did, helping small businesses optimize their investments and plan for retirement. There's something deeply satisfying about turning someone's financial chaos into a clear, profitable strategy. My colleagues always said I had a gift for spotting patterns others missed. Numbers just made sense to me in a way that felt almost intuitive. But I had one major weakness. I trusted people too easily. When someone looked me in the eye and gave me their word, I believed them completely. That trust nearly destroyed my career, but ultimately, it became the weapon that brought down the most corrupt man I've ever encountered. Our office occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown building, all glass and steel with panoramic city views. The atmosphere was electric with ambition. Young professionals in sharp suits discussing million-dollar portfolios over expensive coffee. I thrived in that environment, managing a portfolio worth over $15 million across 37 different client accounts. The stakes were enormous. One wrong move, one miscalculation, and someone's entire retirement could vanish. I carried that responsibility seriously, sometimes staying until midnight to triple-check every calculation. That's where I first encountered Richard Hayes, our new regional director. Richard was everything you'd want in a leader: charismatic, well-dressed, with an MBA from Wharton and 20 years of experience at top-tier firms. He had this way of making everyone feel valued, remembering details about our personal lives and always asking about our career goals. Within weeks, he'd transformed our previously tense department into a motivated team. I remember thinking how lucky we were to finally have someone who understood both the business and the people side of finance. Richard even had this endearing habit of bringing homemade cookies from his wife's bakery every Friday. He'd distribute them personally, taking time to chat with each team member about their projects. But looking back, I should have noticed how he always seemed most interested in the clients with the largest accounts. The first warning sign came during our quarterly review meeting. Richard was presenting our department's performance to the executive board, and I noticed several numbers that didn't match my calculations. When I mentioned it quietly to my colleague Sarah afterwards, she shrugged it off. Richard probably just rounded for simplicity, she said. The board doesn't need exact decimals. But these weren't rounding errors. They were systematic discrepancies that painted our performance in a much more favorable light than reality. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow 6 months later. I was working late, running final numbers for our biggest client, Henderson Manufacturing, when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. According to my records, Henderson's account should have shown a balance of $3.2 million. But when I cross-referenced it with the bank statements Richard had filed, it showed only $700,000. $2.5 million had simply vanished. My hands were actually shaking as I pulled up account after account, finding the same pattern. Richard wasn't just stealing from one client. He was systematically draining funds from every major account under our management. The man who brought us cookies and asked about our weekends was destroying the retirement dreams of dozens of hardworking families. When I confronted him the next morning, expecting some explanation, some mistake I'd made, Richard looked me straight in the eye and said words I'll never forget. "Jessica, sometimes the greater good requires difficult choices. These clients will never even notice, but this money is funding expansion that will benefit everyone in the long run." I stood there speechless as he continued, explaining how he'd already spoken to upper management about my concerning performance issues and my tendency to create unnecessary drama. He'd been building a case against me for months, he said, documenting every late night I'd stayed to double-check numbers as evidence of my incompetence. The theft wasn't just about money. It was about destroying anyone who might expose him. And the worst part? 3 of those stolen accounts belonged to elderly clients who trusted me personally with their life savings. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at the evidence I'd gathered, feeling completely helpless. Richard controlled every channel of communication within our company. He'd already poisoned management against me. And without concrete proof that would hold up in court, I'd just look like a disgruntled employee making wild accusations. I actually considered just walking away, finding a new job, and pretending I'd never seen those numbers. The smart move would have been to protect myself and let someone else deal with the mess. But then I remembered Mrs. Chen, an 82-year-old widow who'd entrusted me with her deceased husband's pension fund. She always brought me green tea and photos of her grandchildren during our meetings, talking about how this money would help pay for her granddaughter's medical school. Richard had stolen $340,000 from her account, money she'd never see again unless I did something about it. That's when I realized I wasn't looking at this correctly. Richard might control the company, but he didn't control the evidence itself. Every transaction he'd made left a digital footprint, and my background in forensic accounting gave me skills he didn't know I possessed. More importantly, I remembered that our firm was scheduled for a surprise audit by the State Financial Commission in just 6 weeks. Richard didn't know about the audit yet. That information was still confidential at the executive level. I spent the next 3 weeks carefully documenting everything, but not in the way you might expect. Instead of just gathering evidence of Richard's theft, I began mapping out his entire network. I discovered he wasn't working alone. 2 other department heads were involved, and they'd been operating this scheme across multiple branches for almost 2 years. The total amount stolen was approaching $8 million across 130 client accounts. But here's where it gets interesting. While digging through the financial records, I discovered something that changed everything. Richard had been so confident in his scheme that he deposited all the stolen money into a single offshore account under his wife's maiden name. He thought he was being clever, but he'd actually created a perfect paper trail that would be impossible to deny. However, just as I was finalizing my evidence package, disaster struck. Richard called me into his office and informed me that I was being terminated immediately for gross negligence and financial impropriety. He'd manufactured a fake mistake in one of my client reports and was using it as justification to fire me before the audit. Security was already waiting to escort me from the building, and I'd have no access to the evidence I'd been gathering. This is where my story takes a turn that still gives me chills. As security was walking me to my desk to collect my personal items, I made a decision that would either save my career or land me in prison. I had exactly 3 minutes to act before they confiscated my computer access, and I used every second. You see, I'd anticipated this exact scenario. Over the previous weeks, I'd been secretly uploading copies of all the evidence to a secure cloud server that Richard couldn't access. But more importantly, I'd also installed a keystroke logger on Richard's computer during one of his Friday cookie distributions. While he was busy charming the team, I'd spent 30 seconds installing software that captured every password, every account number, and every communication he'd made. The first holy shit moment came when I accessed Richard's complete email history from my home computer that evening. Not only did I have evidence of the theft, but I also had detailed communications with his accomplices discussing how they'd frame me as the scapegoat. Richard had written to his partner, "The analyst is getting too close. We'll pin everything on her and be clear by the time the audit starts." But the real bombshell was an email chain with his wife discussing their plans to flee the country with the stolen money the day before the audit began. They'd already purchased plane tickets to a non-extradition country and were planning to transfer the remaining funds that very weekend. The second holy shit moment happened when I realized I had access to Richard's banking passwords. The keystroke logger had captured everything, including his access to the offshore account. I could literally watch in real time as he moved money around, preparing for his escape. But instead of just documenting it, I decided to do something that would either be brilliant or catastrophic. I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and the State Attorney General's office simultaneously, providing them with complete access to Richard's real-time banking activity. But here's the part that still amazes me. I also reached out to every single client whose money had been stolen, giving them a detailed breakdown of exactly how much Richard had taken from their accounts and when. This created a perfect storm. While Richard thought he was cleverly preparing his escape, 68 angry clients were simultaneously filing complaints with the police, the Better Business Bureau, and the State Financial Commission. The authorities couldn't ignore a coordinated complaint from that many victims, especially when I provided them with real-time access to the offshore accounts. The third and final holy shit moment came on Friday afternoon. Richard strolled into the office that morning, completely unaware that his world was about to collapse. I was watching everything unfold through the security cameras I'd gained access to via his compromised computer. At exactly 2:15 p.m., FBI agents walked into our office and placed Richard in handcuffs while he was in the middle of a client presentation. But here's what made it absolutely perfect. The presentation he was giving was to a new client about the importance of trust and security in financial planning. The irony was so perfect that someone in the office actually started laughing when the agents announced he was under arrest for embezzlement and wire fraud. The look on Richard's face when he saw me standing behind the FBI agents was something I'll treasure forever. He finally understood that his incompetent analyst had not only discovered his scheme, but had systematically dismantled his entire operation. The man who'd planned to frame me for his crimes was being arrested while I stood there as the key witness for the prosecution. 6 months later, Richard was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, and his two accomplices received 8 and 10 years respectively. All $8 million was recovered and returned to the clients, plus additional damages paid by the company's insurance. Mrs. Chen got her money back, along with interest and emotional distress compensation. But the most satisfying outcome was completely unexpected. The FBI investigation revealed that I'd uncovered the largest financial fraud case in our state's history. The State Financial Commission offered me a position as their senior fraud investigator, with a salary that was nearly double what I'd been making at Morrison Financial. The job I'd lost trying to do the right thing led me to a career I never knew I wanted. As for Richard, the last I heard, he was working in the prison library, helping other inmates with their legal appeals. I imagine he has plenty of time to think about how his greater good philosophy worked out for everyone involved. The experience taught me that sometimes the people who seem most trustworthy are the ones you should watch most carefully. But more importantly, it showed me that doing the right thing doesn't always require choosing between your career and your conscience. Sometimes, if you're smart enough and patient enough, you can save both. What would you have done if you discovered your boss was stealing millions from innocent retirees? Would you have risked everything to expose the truth, or would you have protected yourself and stayed silent? This story is entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.